Hello, this is Barry Shaw, and again, this is the View from Israel. Now, I know that many of you have been enjoying my video travels throughout Europe, exploring and explaining the root causes of rising anti-Semitism and increasingly public hatred of Israel in various European countries. Now, there seems to be a pattern emerging, and I'm continuing my investigation in what's happening in Holland, or the Netherlands, as they prefer it to be called. I recommend you to go and look at the conversation I had in another video with Ethan Bergman, a student at Maastricht University, who speaks about the frightening experience of Jewish and pro-Israel students on that campus. Now, today I'm continuing my investigation into the root causes of the frauds who are perpetrating anti-Semitic slanders against Israel in Holland. And I'm joined today by a political scientist, Wim Kortenoeven. Welcome to the show, Wim.
Hi, Barry.
Now,
Thanks for having me.
I have to begin by congratulating you, because I referred to you as a Dutch political scientist, but now actually you've become an Israeli. And you tell me how your Aliyah went and where you're living now.
Our Aliyah went smoothly, I must say. I'm 66 years old now. I'm a late Ole, but still very happy. We live in Eli, a beautiful town near Ariel in the Shomron, and we're very happy here.
I want to tell you, Wim, I enjoy visiting Holland. It's a nice place, but I want to speak to you as a Dutch political scientist, because you've been observing the changes that have taken place in your own country over the years. And look, I just want to read out some of the main incidents, if they may not be the main ones, or some of the things that I recorded this year in Holland. In May, when Hamas decided to initiate an intensive rocket barrage against Israel, over 4,000 rockets with no prior provocation from Israel, against Israeli civilian targets, 500 Dutch academics decided to cut their ties with Israeli academic institutions. In June, the Amsterdam State Academy of Fine Arts, well, I would have thought one of the superior academic art campuses, displayed a Palestinian flag and a huge banner on the walls of the university, and the banner read, "From the river to the sea, Palestine would be free." That is an outright call for the elimination of Israel. This month, a Dutch far-left party tried to stop Holocaust memorial event in Holland because they claimed it was inherently racist. Now, I mean, it might have been racist that the Nazis had killed 6 million Jews, but they are making out that the Holocaust memorial, any event in Holland, is Islamic racist because what? Their pretense is Israel is doing the same to the Palestinians as the Nazis did to the Jews. This is utter nonsense, and yet this is what's being indoctrinated in parties and on campuses throughout Holland. I would have expected that to have come from the far right, not from the far left. And the people who gather in Dam Square every weekend promoting a fake Palestinian narrative are from the political left, and they're helped, from my experience, having been there, by Muslim migrants, as I discovered, from Turkey and from Syria, bringing with them their own brand of anti-Semitism from the old country. On the other hand, a person you may know, called Taco Dankers, who was the chair of a major broadcasting station, had to resign for being a member of a think tank that regularly publishes anti-Semitic statements. To be honest, I don't know if that think tank is left-wing or right-wing. Maybe you can tell me that. The founder of that broadcasting company also had to resign at the end of 2019 because he wanted Holocaust deniers to have the freedom and have their voices heard on his station. Wim, what is happening in your old country, Holland?
Well, first, the party that you refer to as a left-wing party that wanted to change the Memorial Day of the Second World War is called Bijeen. It's effectively one person in parliament. She is a black woman from Suriname who ended up in the show business. She was also a ladies' hairdresser once, and a nightclub singer, or a nightclub somebody that dances in poles in a nightclub. You know, that's what she did for a profession. She is a notorious rioter in parliament, one voice, and she looks for provocation opportunities all the time. So this was another one of her provocations to suggest that the memorial for the Second World War, which is obviously qua content, it has a lot to do with the Shoah, that she wanted to change it. But it was not because of the Palestinians. That your interpretation is not completely right there. It was because she wanted to make it more inclusive, so to involve other stories than just what she considers the white story of the Second World War into this commemoration. The other person you mentioned is this guy was the chairman of the board of recommendation of this new broadcasting company, a private broadcasting company, which is Ongehoord Nederland, which means unheard Holland. And it's a right-wing alternative for the present mainstream media on television here. They're right-wing and very new and therefore unnuanced. And you could say they also look for opportunities to provoke in order to get attention. This chairman of this board of recommendation, indeed, he was involved in right-wing, extreme right-wing websites with theories about Jews that you and I would consider very anti-Semitic. So this was, I don't remember exactly how it came into the open, but anyway, it came into the open and he was forced to resign. There were other scandals with the same broadcasting company in the past 5-6 months. And the overall view on their political position is that they are pro-Israel, but at the same time, they are not afraid to touch anti-Jewish conspiracy theories. This is one of the problems, you know. There is no such thing as a rational right-wing view or a rational left-wing view. It's all sort of mixed, and there are alternatives from both sides. And there's also the part where the extreme touch each other from the left and the right, and like it's not clearly right or left wing anymore, and it's not clearly anti-Semitic or not anti-Semitic anymore. There are many gray areas, also in politics, but we'll probably get to talk about that as well.
Tell me, do the rank and file Dutch Jews, are they sensitive to anti-Semitism within the country? I spoke to people from Sweden, for instance, where the Jews of Sweden are recommended not to go out and wear any identifying Jewish clothing or Star of David or kippah. Is this the same situation in Holland, or is it not as bad as that?
It depends where you are, actually. I was in Holland only a few weeks ago, and I wore my kippah. My son was with me, also wearing a kippah, and we entered a supermarket in The Hague. I was visiting my old mother. I wanted to do some shopping for her, and there's this guy coming from about 4 or 5 meters, and he came very deliberately walking towards us, and I was afraid that he was going to say something negative. And then he bowed and he said, "Shalom." And he did the same with my son. I didn't have any anti-Semitic experiences in the 2 weeks that we were in Holland. But I was not in Amsterdam or in the center of Rotterdam, where you were easily trapped by these circumstances. And it's not wise to wear a kippah. But in many parts of the Netherlands, it's not a problem.
Yeah, I'd like to take up the issue of Jews being victim of anti-Semitism. I have in mind, for instance, the two rabbis that have been attacked by anti-Semites. There was a Rabbi Joseph Antebi and also Rabbi Jacobs, who I met when I visited Holland and Amsterdam to give a couple of talks. Have there been incidents of Jewish properties and businesses or synagogues that have been attacked by anti-Semites?
Yes, this has happened, and Rabbi Jacobs, who lives in a provincial town of Amersfoort, which is not really the center of Muslim extremism or right-wing extremism. It's an average Dutch town, very nice people in general, and a very quiet town. And he was attacked. His house was attacked several times, and his car, I think the tires were slashed. And those were anti-Semitic attacks, no doubt about it. But he's very visible. He is in the media a lot, so people know where to find him. And for me, it's not very clear where these attackers came from, actually. They might have come from Amsterdam or Rotterdam. I doubt they're local. I mean, I have friends in Amersfoort, Jewish friends, and they never have any problems. You know, they walk to shul in Chabad outfit, and they never encountered anti-Semitism that I know of. But there are places in Holland where you do have this phenomena, and it's mainly in the big cities where you have significant Islamic population, like in certain areas of The Hague, Rotterdam, and Amsterdam.
In the cases of anti-Semitism, where, for instance, I named here a couple of rabbis that had been attacked, Jewish properties, and also a synagogue, I think belonging to Rabbi Jacobs, have the identity of the perpetrators of these attacks, were they made public? Do we know who they were?
I'm not sure. You would have to ask Rabbi Jacobs. There was another series of incidents in Amsterdam. In the past several years, there was this restaurant that was continuously attacked, almost continuously, by the same person, a guy from Syria, who smashed a window, who threatened them with violence, who put slogans on the window of the restaurant, the Israeli restaurant. This was like a serial attacker in a Jewish area of Amsterdam. And this guy was identified. First, they tried to represent him as a confused man, you know, that was in dire straits himself, and maybe he couldn't help what he was doing. There was some psychiatric problems, and at the end, after 3 or 4 of these attacks, they treated him more seriously from the authority side and from the Amsterdam municipal side. But again, this was one person. It's not that there's riots around Dutch property or Dutch restaurants or synagogues in Holland with many people attending those riots. It's mainly lone wolves.
I beg to differ on that one, because I do take up these incidents. And if I take this particular incident, this incident of anti-Semitism, where you said this guy arrived at this restaurant shouting anti-Semitic things, smashed the window, went in, started to threaten the people inside. This person was not a native-born Dutch person. And what's worried me as I travel around Europe and I investigate these things, what I find increasingly troubling is that the authorities refuse to identify the people who are committing these anti-Semitic attacks. The other thing I find as I go around Europe, as has happened in France and Germany and Sweden, and now also, as you're repeating to me, in Holland, that what happens is when these people are identified, and they're usually identified as migrants from the Middle East, i.e. Arabic background or Muslim, in order to, I don't know what the right word would be, to really soften the charges against these people, they make out that he's not somebody who has been raised on Islam and doing it because of what his faith is teaching him, but he's got mental problems or has psychological problems or whatever. But when it's happening repeatedly over and over again in different places, you begin to wonder whether all Muslims or Arabs who migrate into the Europe and commit acts of hate crimes against Jews in various forms, including violent ones. They cannot all be excused as having mental problems. That is Islam. This is the extremist Islam that is raising its head, and it's being linked increasingly, and this is what I would like to hear from you, with the left wing, because what we're finding, and there's corroboration of this in Holland as well, that you have left-wing activists who are getting involved in politics, who are making what I called in a previous video an unholy alliance with people from the Middle East, from the Arabs, etc., in what's called a red-green alliance. And the victims are usually, the main victim is usually Israel, but the fallout victims are the local Jews. Now, what can you tell me and my viewers about this phenomena in Holland?
First, I want to get back to what you said about Arab violent migrants in Holland that turned against Jews being labeled as nutcases, or as I said, people with an attitude problem or disturbed persons. This is also the way they label them often. Of course, the authorities do that to hide the fact that these people are Muslims. This is a system. It's the same in all over Europe, that authorities are trying to downplay the identity, the ideological identity of attackers of this sort. So we don't disagree on that. The only thing that I wanted to say about this specific attacker, that he was a lone wolf. Like many people that commit these acts are lone wolves. They might be, how do you say it? There might be instigation from mosques or whatever, but the attackers are mainly individual persons. There have been other manifestations of Jew hatred in the streets of Holland, which are much more upsetting and much more dangerous. Like we had demonstrations in The Hague, in the Muslim quarter there, where people from ISIS were shouting anti-Semitic abuse with a violent connotation. And they did it in a group, and the police didn't act because they were afraid of this group, and afraid that it would that an intervention would cause even more problems. So of course I recognize what you're saying, but we have to be precise in how we what picture we launch on social media or here now in this interview.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Wim. Let me give you the Israeli example. We do not differentiate over here between individual lone wolf acts of terror, whether it's stabbing, shootings, or vehicular terror, or collective terror underdone by either Hezbollah or Hamas. Terror is terror. We don't say to the guy who stabbed a Haredi Jew in Jerusalem a few days ago, mentally disturbed. They're doing it because these people have been indoctrinated. And I object that the authorities in Holland and other countries try to excuse and hide the identity of Islamic terror under the pretense of the man was mentally disturbed. That's the first thing I'd like to raise. Now, the second thing as well.
There's no difference of opinion here. But there you have to make a distinction. If somebody is acting as a lone wolf and there's no obvious support from the outside, for instance, here in Israel we had this attack like one you refer to, and it was applauded by both the PLO and by Hamas. So then you can blame them for being complicit in this specific murderous attack. But in Holland, with the people that we refer to, there was no such thing. There was a denial of collective responsibility from the Muslim community, and whether that's fake or not, you have to well, take that into consideration. You cannot prove that it's not fake. This is the problem.
Yes, again, I have an issue with this thing about whether an apology was made by the Muslim community to the Jewish restaurant owner, or to the rabbis or whatever. But what is happening in Europe is an indoctrination by whether it's been done in certain mosques or by some Muslim Brotherhood or other sort of Islamic organizations. And some of those are in league with some of the far left, and some of them are indoctrinating individual people to go out and perpetrate acts against Jews. But collectively, they also do the same thing with, as you quite rightly said, anti-Semitic slogans and rallies, and also certainly rallies organized to go after the collective Jew, Israel, the collective Jew. Let me give you another. I gave the example of Ethan Bergman, who has been suffering anti-Semitic attacks and having things like swastikas put on the door in his campus, etc. I mentioned Rabbi Jacobs. I met Rabbi Jacobs' son, who has a youth group of Jewish students, and the Jewish students told me that they had been threatened into silence on the university. They had a radio station. Not just for the Jewish students, which they had to close down because they came up under threats. Now, I don't apply the thing that the people that helped close down or force the closing down of a Jewish radio station on a campus in Holland are all mentally disturbed. You know, is it the individual that's mentally disturbed? Or is it the groups that march through the streets of Malmo and certain places in Holland? You mentioned The Hague, collectively. Are they mentally disturbed? Because the outcome is the same. What I want to come on to here is what the Jewish organizations or Jewish individuals are doing to counter the anti-Semitism and the anti-Israelism. I understand you have an organization there, the Center for Information and Documentation of Israel, CIDI, who is supposed to be the organization to combat anti-Semitism and spread awareness of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, etc. I understand they do things. Maybe you could talk to us about CIDI.
No, I'd rather not, because I worked with CIDI for decades. So anything, it wouldn't be appropriate. First, everything that you could blame CIDI for, I'm partly responsible for that as well, because I worked with them and for them for, I think, since 1983 in various capacities. CIDI is a Jewish organization. It's the only lobby organization, I think, in Europe that is covering both political realm and the area of anti-Semitism, combating anti-Semitism. But it's not the only one in Holland that's combating anti-Semitism. We have various organizations responsible for that, Jewish and non-Jewish. But the thing that they all have in common is that they have to survive in a very complicated political landscape where you cannot always point the finger saying with the accusation that goes with the finger, if you know what I mean. It could be problematic for the Jewish community to go too hard against Islamic interests. This is the same all over Europe. You'll probably recognize that from other countries as well. The Jewish community is a very it's not weak, but it has its weaknesses in that it has to protect its interests from many sides. And therefore, to be very accusative to Muslim communities, well, they might partly be responsible or are partly responsible for the incitement or allowing the incitement that results in anti-Semitic abuse by Muslims. It is very difficult to raise that issue. You see that also from the Friends of the Jews in the Netherlands. There is this party, the Christian Union. They're Christian, not Orthodox Christian, they're a liberal Christian party. They have 7 seats in parliament, and they're the champions of the Jews where it concerns combating anti-Semitism. But they too are very anxious not to go across the red line where they are too accusative towards Muslims. So they sort of try to balance the thing, you know. And I have I suspect that they're even looking for ways to balance it, like finding right-wing extremism, anti-Jewish abuse, in order to balance it with the Islamic variation, so that it is more a national problem instead of one of the Islamic community in the Netherlands.
Well, let me tell you some of my personal experience. I think I met you, in fact, I'm sure I met you, when I was in Holland. I was invited to give a couple of talks. One was to the Jewish community in Amsterdam at the Jewish Liberal Center, where I think I met you there. The other one was that I spoke the next day to a Christian audience in a place called Harderwijk outside of Amsterdam. My conclusions of my visit to Holland was this: that the Jewish audience was less enthusiastic for Israel than the Christian audience. The Jewish audience were, how do I put it, ignorant of ways to counter the lies and the misconceptions of the pro-Palestinians and the BDS movement. I emphasize that because you were in the audience at one of the Jewish Liberal Center, which was infiltrated by 3 of the leading members of the BDS movement in Holland. And after I made my presentation, if you remember, I allowed for Q&A, and I allowed one of the members of the BDS movement to ask questions or make a point. So rather than he made the point about the crimes that Israel was committing, and at that time, one of the crimes he talked about was an illegal blockade on Gaza. I don't know if you remember that time in history. And I had to allow him to talk about this illegal blockade and the poor Palestinians that were suffering because nothing was being supplied to them, etc., etc. It was about the same time as they had these flotillas of ships going to Gaza. And I asked to pose one question in front of the audience, because I found that what I wanted to persuade was the middle ground, the audience sitting there. So I asked this, what I call BDS bonehead, if he knew how many trucks went into Gaza from Israel on a daily basis, and he refused to answer. And I said to him, come on, give it your best shot. And he refused to give an answer. And I said, you either know and you don't want to tell the audience, or you don't know, and I'll tell you, there are 800 trucks a day, this is at that time, going into Gaza from Israel. What sort of blockade is that when 800 trucks go in? And he said it's not sufficient, or some excuse like that. But I said, before you said it was a legal blockade, there's nothing going in. Now I'm telling you it's 800. But however, you represent, I said, the interest of the poor Palestinians. So let me ask you another question, I asked. And if you remember what it was, I asked him, how many trucks a day go into Gaza from Egypt? Because Egypt was holding the same blockade of Gaza in order to prevent lethal weapons being supplied by Iran and other places in order to Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza. So how many trucks a day, I asked him again, went into Gaza from Egypt? And the answer for that was 0. So I asked him, when you're promoting your pro-Palestinian interest for human rights in Dam Square every weekend, have you ever protested the Egyptian blockade on Gaza? And the answer was none. And then I turned to the audience and I went on to other issues as well, including Syria, of their murder of Palestinians at there, which he didn't have protest about. So I said, you don't protest against Syria, don't protest against Jordan, you don't protest against Egypt. It's only Israel. That makes you an anti-Semite. And I turned to the audience and I said, simple facts. You people need to have simple facts and know how to counter boneheads like these BDS for idiots. I had a book at that time which was called Fighting Hamas, BDS and Anti-Semitism. It was named that because if you have the hatred of Israel, the same people usually have a hatred of Jews. And following my visit to Amsterdam, I did participate in a counter rally, if you want to call it that, in Dam Square, because two of the audience in the Jewish Liberal Center were two Christian girls, one called Sabine Stark, the other one Brenda Artson, who were the ones who had invited me to speak to the Christians. And when I walked in there, the first thing I asked them was, how many of you support Israel? And to a man and a woman, they all stood up and clapped and applauded and said, hallelujah, God bless Israel. That response I never got from the Jewish audience. So I joined these girls who brought people into Dam Square every weekend with Israeli flags to counter the protests of the pro-Palestinian BDS idiots. And of those people that were there were about 24 people. I would think about 7, make it 9, because me and my wife were Jewish. And this is what I'm asking you about. In Holland, how active are the Jews in defending themselves against anti-Semitism and supporting Israel?
The Jewish community in Holland is basically the remnant of a destroyed community. After Poland, the Dutch Jewish community lost most of its members. I mean, the highest percentage of its members were murdered in the Shoah. And after the war, many people left to Israel, the survivors, or even to the United States. What is left is a remnant. It's poorly organized. I told you earlier in our conversation that most Dutch Jews are not connected to any Jewish, formally connected to a Jewish organization, not even to a shul. So we're talking about a community that has not much institutional power. There are institutions, but they're led by the same people. You see the same board members, you see them all over the place because of what I earlier said. There's not sufficient institutional power in that community. So you cannot blame the community for not putting up a fist as big as you would like against what is threatening them. There is CD and there are Jewish organizations that deal with specific tasks that promote Jewish interests. But it is limited. It's not like in the United Kingdom where you have a very viable Jewish community that's well organized and that has a strong leadership in many cities in the UK. It's not like that in Holland. Coming back to your question, what is the practical resistance of Jews against what is threatening them? That's relative. I agree. If you look at the way Jewish organizations like City operate, most of the employees at City are non-Jews because they cannot get enough Jews to fill the ranks of the institution. Even in the board, there are several non-Jews in a Jewish organization. So that tells you a lot. And you also have to consider that the Jewish organization is a very vulnerable, the Jewish community is a very vulnerable community in the whole landscape in Holland. It's only 30 to 40,000 people. They have to be careful how they position themselves in an organized way. What can I say? It makes sense, right? That you cannot over-represent yourself. This is the reason why there are forces outside the Jewish community taking care of part of the defense of the Jews in the Netherlands, like this Christian Union Party, the Orthodox Christian Party, SGP, several politicians in several other parties that are individually committed to helping the Jewish community in the Netherlands. The PVV of Geert Wilders, which also has several Jewish members of parliament, is also playing a role in that. But the Jewish community as such, indeed, is limited in its ability and in its will to over-represent itself.
The response of Jews in Holland is, quite frankly, pathetic. I wanted the statistic our viewers would know about. The Netherlands, Holland, had the highest number of Jewish victims in Western Europe during the Second World War. 3/4 of Dutch Jews were murdered in the Holocaust, which is more than the Benelux countries or any of the Western European countries. Quite frankly, some of those were given away, snitched to the Germans and to the Nazis by their Dutch neighbors. And it seems they've learned nothing from this. They are not active. I gave you the names of other people. The next day, as I told you about the enthusiastic and active support of the Dutch Christians, they even, where you're living now, they even subscribe on a monthly basis for food packages of wine, olives, dates, things like this, coming out of Judea and Samaria as part of their active support for Israel. You won't find the Jewish community doing things like that. I mentioned these two girls, Bean Stark and Brenda Artson, but I could add to that people like Andrew Tucker and Jack van der Taag, Fred Berensma, all part of the Christian community of Amsterdam who are active, proactive, through International Christians for Israel support. I tried unsuccessfully to create in Holland Dutch Lawyers for Israel, based on the successful model of UK Lawyers for Israel, to defend Jews under attack, including victims of hate crime and violence, as in the cases we mentioned here. Whether it's students on campus, or whether it's Jewish businesses, or whether it's Jewish institutions, or whether it's Jewish rabbis or individual Jews, and to respond against the incorrect provocations against Dutch Jews, suffered by people like Ethan Bergman and the rabbis, etc., and to take legal action, not only against the people who perpetrate these hate crimes, but those lying and slandering Jews in the Jewish state. And I couldn't do that at all, didn't succeed in that at all. It seems that, in my opinion, Holland, the Netherlands are in a desperate state when it comes to the defense of the Jews over there, and anybody speaking up effectively on behalf of Israel. It seems, as you mentioned, that even the Jews in Holland have to leave it up to the Christians and maybe one or two political organizations, I'm not quite sure who, to defend them. Is there anything you would like to say in closing that you could maybe qualify what I said?
Well, there are individual Jews, and for instance, there's this Jewish lawyer, Mr. Loonstein, who is very active in combating anti-Semitism, basically with his own law practice, because he also thinks that not enough is being done by the organized Jewish community. But you also have to look at the other side. I mean, you refer to Christians that are pro-Israel. I can tell you horror stories about Christians that are the most vicious enemies of Israel, and they are Dutch Christians. So there is a counterweight there also. Everything has two sides. The Dutch anti-Israel movement is dominated by Christians. There is a former prime minister and a minister of justice. He was both, Dries van Acht, who is a Catholic, a revered man by many, who is basically an anti-Semite, who is notorious for his drive to try to crucify the Jewish state any way possible. He's a very old man now, and he's losing his mental abilities, as I understand. Recently, he had a stroke, and it's not going well with him. But he was a driving force for a long time, and a political heavyweight that managed to turn his own party, the Christian Democratic Party, against Israel by lobbying very intensively on all levels inside that party. And this guy, and that tells you something about how anti-Semitism works, Barry. This guy, this Dries van Acht, when he was a justice minister in the 70s, he was trying to have released 4 of the major war criminals sitting still in Dutch jails at the time. One of them was the Dutch Eichmann, who the guy was responsible for the deportation and murder of the majority of the Dutch Jews during the Shoah. This guy was sitting in jail in Breda prison with 3 others. One of the others was Mr. Cortella, an Austrian, who was personally responsible for almost killing my own father in Amersfoort concentration camp, and he was a prisoner there. He tortured my father so severely that he had problems for the rest of his life as a result. So there was a personal angle for me too. Now this Mr. van Acht, who was so eager to have 4 major war criminals released for humanitarian reasons. Can you imagine that? One of them being the Eichmann of the Netherlands, who put children on trains to their death, Jewish children. So this guy was also the main driver of political anti-Semitism in the Netherlands, weaponizing legal institutions against the Jewish state. Lawfare is one of the things that he was involved in. And the major anti-Israel organization in the Netherlands is called the Rights Forum. You have to Google that. It was created by this Van Acht. And it is a vicious vehicle of anti-Jewish propaganda. And they say, of course, that that's not the case, that they're against anti-Semitism, but in practice, they're trying to literally crucify the Jewish state, which is something, if you think about it.
I know about that because I've been dealing for many years, and I refer to it in my books about the replacement theology of the Catholics and the Christian church. But it's more than remedied in today's world by the pro-Israel actions of, as I mentioned, the Christian Zionists in Holland today. But as a counter to what you said, I can refer you to one of the Dutch rabbis that I referred to you had been beaten up by an anti-Semite. And lo and behold, this Haredi Jew belongs to Neturei Karta, which is a sect of the Jewish faith that doesn't recognize the state of Israel and will not recognize the state of Israel until the Mashiach, until the Messiah comes. And this rabbi had said that when he got beaten up and could have been killed, it was really Israel's fault he was beaten up. Unbelievable. So you get these people on both sides. However, what we have to judge is who is being active for the Jews and for Israel today in Holland, and who is active against the Jews of Holland and against Israel. And the symbiotic linking about the 2 hatreds that are going on that are both against Israel and against the local Jews. Because as we found out in Holland and these other places, when Hamas launches 4,000 rockets against Israel and people take to the streets against Israel, they also are quoting anti-Semitic slogans. And I'm sad, unfortunately, you've been absolutely honest with me, and I appreciate it, Wim, for what you're saying and your perspective of what's going on in Holland. And it leaves me with a very sad conclusion about what is happening in Holland. And all I could say is the Jews over there really had cared about Israel or knew about Israel, I think you either have to suffer for increasing anti-Semitism and increasing anti-Israel activism going on in your country over there, or do what Wim did and make Aliyah and come and join us. Wim, I want to thank you, Wim Kortenoeven. I want to thank you for your contribution today. It's been quite a spicy discussion, which our audience will appreciate. Thank you for being with me. Enjoy your Aliyah in Israel. I'm sure you're going to be a very active Israeli going forward. And I would like to first find out by asking you, the viewer, when you see this video, do two things, please. Click the like button and also click the subscribe button. We need a first 100 people to click the subscribe button in order for YouTube to give us our official title, which will be youtube.com, The View from Israel. So please enjoy, share this video, click the like button, click the subscribe button, and I'll see you again in the next version of The View from Israel.